later. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. And I am so happy to be able to introduce my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Michael Lotker, who has taught us many times before and is going to offer us a second session on the mythology in Judaism. So please take it away, Michael.
Okay, thank you. And I will offer the usual prayer for study of sacred matters. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I am going to start my PowerPoint presentation. Actually, before I start the PowerPoint presentation, this is not an enormous group, so there's an opportunity for people to ask questions or make comments. So before I jump into this, anybody have a question, comment, or I will just jump in. But feel free to ask when things occur to you. Okay, so I presume you can see the PowerPoint, yes? Okay, terrific. So this is session number 2. There will be a total of 5, and this one is on the myths of Shekhinah. Again, I mentioned this last time, and I will mention it again. On my website, I have a lot of material. It's just my last name, lotker.com. If you click on classes, you will get a long list of classes, including the 5 sessions I think I taught about 2 or 3 years ago. And it's basically the same material. I do go through it and add. I never subtract. It's kind of like an Orthodox religious service. Why are they so long? Why do the rabbis have to go so quickly? It's because the rabbis never remove anything. They only add. So as I go through it again, looking at some other texts, I have added some things that I didn't have a couple of years ago. But I have a copy of all the texts and also recordings of all these classes. And I don't know to what extent your synagogue also is posting recordings. So here we go. Myths of the Shekhinah. So in the Hebrew Bible, you find the word Shekhinah. It refers to the presence of God. Like there are times when, Moses is on the mountain and the presence of God is there. And there's a lot of different words in Hebrew that are used to represent the presence of God. One is kavod, and Shekhinah is another one. So in biblical Hebrew, Shekhinah is simply the presence of God. It is a feminine word because it has the ah ending, like Torah and neshama and chuppah. Lots of words are, Hebrew, like Romance languages, all the nouns are either positive or feminine. So as Jewish mythology developed, certainly in the Talmud, and as you will see in Jewish mysticism, the rabbis took the idea of God's feminine aspect much more seriously, and as you'll see, for those of you that haven't been exposed to this, I would say almost shockingly so. And speaking of shockingly so, this is a book of photographs by Leonard Nimoy called Shekhinah. And here is not your typical person putting on tefillin, a woman putting on tefillin. And I have strategically placed that little box that says this 2005 book was not well received by many Jews, because that's a pretty transparent garment she is wearing. And I wanted to keep this at least G-rated, or so I put that little box there. Okay. Before I begin, in preparing this material, most of the material, but not all, come from the book that I mentioned last time. I got lots of books here. A wonderful book called Tree of Souls by Howard Schwartz. But there are a lot of other wonderful collections of midrash. Midrash, again, are stories that the rabbis put in to answer questions that arise in the text. So a classic example is God recognizes Abraham to be the other party in the covenant, to be the first Israelite, to be the first Jew, you can argue. And so the question is, what was it about Abraham that God saw that made him a good candidate? So the rabbis will jump in with a story. You may be familiar with the story of Abraham smashing the idols in his father's idol shop. And that is not in the Bible. It is in Midrash. Interestingly, it's in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, that same story. Many of these Midrashim actually show up in the Quran. That's a whole other interesting subject. And Ginsburg has put together a pretty extensive collection called The Legends of the Jews. And it's 6 volumes plus an index. And then if you just want to focus on biblical material, there's kind of a shorter version of that called Legends of the Bible by Louis Ginsburg. This book is a wonderful book called the Book of Legends, Sefer HaAgadah. It's actually about 100 years old in the original Hebrew, and it's hundreds of pages, very fine print with lots of material on legends from the Talmud and Midrash. And then, of course, Howard Schwartz. So I mentioned the book that I use, but here's just a bunch of books by Howard Schwartz, and I have to admit, I haven't really gotten into his other books. So Lilith's Cave, Leaves from the Garden of Eden, Rooms of the Soul, A Journey to Paradise, Miriam's Tambourine, Jerusalem of Gold, The Diamond Tree, The Captive Soul of the Messiah. He is the preeminent scholar of Jewish mythology. Oh, and another one, Elijah's Violin. And I have another one that wasn't even on this list. So he's terrific. So now I want to dive into this concept of the feminine aspect of God and the feminine aspect present in Judaism. Yesterday was the year of the woman, so it's perfect night to be exploring this material. And this is one of my favorite Zohar stories. There's a wonderful bunch of books by Daniel Matt about Kabbalah, and this is one called Zohar Annotated and Explained. And I know it's pretty small, so I will read it. And it's called The Old Maid and the Ravishing Maiden. And in this case, the ravishing maiden is not Shekhinah, but Torah. Remember, Torah is also a feminine word. So I'm just going to read it for you. I love this story. It's my favorite story. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi met one night at the Tower of Tyre. They stayed there as guests, delighting in each other. Rabbi Yossi said, "I am so glad to see the face of the Shekhinah." In this way, when people study Torah together, I think I have a text from this, the face of the Shekhinah, the face of God is among them. For just now, the whole way here, I was pestered by an old man, a donkey driver, who kept asking me riddles along the way. Donkey drivers show up a lot in the Zohar as what seems like on the outer surface a very common person, but speaking pearls of absolute wisdom. So here's what the donkey driver said. Who is a ravishing maiden without eyes, her body concealed and revealed? She comes out in the morning and is hidden all day. She adorns herself with adornments that are not. All this he asked on the way. I was annoyed. Now I can relax. If we had been together, we would have engaged in words of Torah instead of strange words of chaos. Rabbi Yossi said, of all the words I heard you say, there was one that really amazed me. Either you said it out of folly or they are empty words. By the way, I'm excerpting the material. This is actually a much longer story. He says a bunch of other things, but I'm only including the story of the ravishing maiden. Either you said it out of folly or they are empty words. The old man said, and which one was that? He said, the one about the ravishing maiden. The human beings are so confused in their minds. So this is now the old man, the donkey driver, speaking. They do not see the way of truth in Torah. She calls out to them every day in love, but they do not want to turn their heads. She removes a word from her sheath. It is seen for a moment, then quickly hides away. But she does so only for those who know her intimately. The she and the her here are Torah, feminine word. A parable. To what can this be compared? To a beloved, ravishing maiden hidden deep within her palace. She has one lover, unknown to anyone, hidden too. Out of love for her, this lover passes by her gate constantly. lifting his eyes to every side, knowing that her lover hovers about her gate constantly. What does she do? She opens a little window in her hidden palace, revealing her face to her lover, then swiftly withdraws, concealing herself. No one near him sees or reflects, only the lover, and his heart and soul and everything within him flow out to her. He knows that out of love for him, she revealed herself for that one moment, to awaken love in him. So it is with the word of Torah. She reveals herself to no one but her lover. Torah knows that the one who is wise of heart hovers about her gate every day. What does she do? She reveals her face from the palace, beckoning him with a hint, then swiftly withdraws to her hiding place. No one there knows or reflects. He alone does. And his heart and soul and everything within him flows out to her. This is why Torah reveals and conceals herself. With love, she approaches her lover to arouse love within him. Come see the way of Torah. At first, when she begins to reveal herself to a human, she beckons him with a hint. If he perceives, good. If not, she sends him a message, calling him simple. The Torah says to a messenger, tell that simple one to come closer so I can talk with him. He approaches. She begins to speak with him from behind a curtain she has drawn, words that he can follow until he reflects a little. This is drasha, midrash. Then she converses with him through a veil, words riddled with allegory. This is Haggadah, legends, allegorical messages. She says to him, do you see that word, that hint with which I beckoned you at first? So many secrets there, this one and that one. Now he sees that nothing should be added to those words and nothing taken away. Now the pshat of the verse, just as it is, not a single word should be added or deleted. The pshat is the plain meaning of the text. Human beings must become aware, pursuing Torah to become her lovers. The old man was silent for a moment. The companions were amazed. They did not know if it was day or night, if they were really there or not. Enough, companions, for now you know the evil side has no power over you. I, Yeva Sava, have stood before you to awaken your awareness of all these words. They rose as if awakened from sleep and threw themselves down in front of him, unable to utter a word. After a while, they began to cry. Rabbi Chia opened and said, set me as a seal upon your heart and as a seal upon your arm, from the Song of Songs. Love and sparks from the flame of our heart will escort you. May it be the will that our image be engraved upon your heart, as your image is engraved in ours. He kissed them and blessed them, and they left. When they joined Rabbi Shimon and told him everything that happened, he was delighted and amazed. Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the leading character in the Zohar. He said, you are so fortunate to have attained all this. Here you were with this heavenly lion, a fierce warrior, for whom many warriors are nothing, and you could not recognize him. I am amazed that you escaped being punished by him. The Blessed Holy One must have wanted to save you. He called out these verses for them. The path of the righteous is like a gleaming light, shining ever brighter until full day. When you walk, your stride will be free. If you run, you will not stumble. Your people, all of them righteous, will inherit the land forever. Sprout of my planting, work of my hands in which I glory. So any thoughts on why, what you see in this? And I don't know, maybe why do you think this is my favorite text?
Michael, maybe you want to stop sharing for a minute so we can see everybody.
Yeah, okay, happy to do that. Yeah, so any thoughts about what you read in this text? So what this says to me is the Torah, again, it's a feminine image. And you have to imagine kind of old Spain. Remember the Zohar, although it's attributed back to the 1st and 2nd century, it was actually written in Spain in probably the 12th, 13th century. So that he's comparing the Torah to a woman hidden behind walls and hidden behind, a window with a gate. And she opens a gate a little bit, and her lover is there. And if he sees her and pursues her, she reveals more and more and more. Go back to Leonard Nimoy's picture.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't, then he's a simpleton, and she just lets him go on the way. So this relates to one of the things we see in rabbinics a lot, and that is the Torah is like a ravishing maiden. If you just read the story quickly, the Pshat, the rabbis say if it was just the Pshat, actually, I think this is Zohar. They say if it was just stories, we could have written better stories. Stephen King writes better stories than some of these stories. But those who are, the Hebrew word is ohavei Torah, those who love Torah, stand there and seek her out. And if you seek her out, she reveals a little more and more and more. And there's sexual tension here. That's why she's a ravishing maiden. So for those of us who love Torah, it's in seeking her out, standing by her window, going, beneath the outer garments, to get to know the essence of Torah. My wife was called upon to prepare a Torah cover for a congregation in Ojai. And she knew nothing of this text, but she grew up in Morocco and was sort of influenced by these ideas. She prepared a Torah cover. I've never seen anything like it. I need to get a picture of it. It's very feminine, and it's got veils. It's like the dance of the 7 veils. And to get to the Torah, you literally unwrap the veils around her. So for those of us, and my guess is you are the folks that really get into this, that love Torah, we just go into it deeper and deeper, removing the veils to the different layers. Yes, Rabbi.
So 2 things that occurred to me, and it is a beautiful story, and you explained it really, really nicely. One is it makes me think of the Song of Songs.
Oh, of course.
Which has the exact same imagery of a woman behind a gate and kind of looking out, and the lover, and they don't quite make it together, whatever. So that's kind of interesting. The other is, as beautiful as the imagery is, there's some issues that I have as a feminist with the woman, the ravishing maiden, the one who sort of tempts and whatever. I know it.
Yeah. I am 100% with you. I will repeat something I learned from our teacher, Judith Abrams, who is of blessed memory, who was a great Talmud scholar. And when she would start teaching texts like this, she would say, okay, everybody pound the table, for 10 seconds about the misogyny and, that we see in these texts. Get it out of your system. And now let's go study the texts. Because there's no escaping it. These texts were written by men, for men. For the most part, there's some, questions about some of the texts, like Esther. There's some theories that it may have been written by a woman. I think even Song of Songs, I haven't studied it recently. But anyway, there is no question that these are male-dominated images. And I do think, and one of the things we're going to see in all the other Shekhinah stories, is that the love of Israel for God and Torah is presented in sexual terms, because that's a very powerful force in human nature. So it's more than just intellectual love. This is not, the relationship of Plato. It's not a Platonic relationship, to be quite literal about it. The rabbis of mysticism are going to image it in sexual terms, in addition to, loving and Platonic love and friendship and everything else. There are sexual overtones going on here. Okay, I am going to jump back to screen share and continue. So one of the ways that this gets developed, I presume you can see the screen, is this idea of the Sefirot. And we could spend 3 weeks studying the Sefirot, and it's very complicated. I will just present it in the simple form, I would say, necessary for understanding it for purposes of our discussion. The Torah says God created humanity in God's image. So the question is, what does that mean? I often say when I'm discussing those texts in Genesis, what does that say about God? What does that say about humans? That we have a divine nature? Does that say God has a human nature? So there's all kinds of interesting questions. In the Zohar, they developed this idea. And, if you look at this image on the right, there is a person. So this model called the Sephirot is one way of saying, in what sense is do God and humans share an image? So in the Sephirot, there are 10 aspects of God, the higher 3, Keter, Bina, Chochmah, and then the lower 7. 7's a very common number in Jewish thought. Some scholars believe that this enters because there are 7 visible heavenly bodies. So that may be the reason why 7 became such an important number. And again, all of these elements have tons of material written about them. There's a feminine side, there's a masculine side. So Keter is crown. And beyond Keter, we don't even have, it's Ein Sof without N. It's ayin, it's nothing. It's no thing. Not nothing, but no thing. And you can't know it. But below it, we can have interactions with God on at least 10 different levels. And down here, you have Yesod. I don't know if you can even see this, but one of the ideas behind Yesod is it's a phallus, a masculine aspect of God. And Shekhinah is Malchut, kingdom, queen. It's the feminine aspect. So we're actually talking about a sexual union here between God and Shekhinah. And that's going to be developed in a lot of the stories that we are going to take a look at. One of the things is Keter, from the source, unknowable source, a point occurs, that's Chokhmah, and then a point is implanted in the divine womb, which is Bina, this is feminine, and from the divine womb, W-O-M-B, all of the other Sephirot are born. This is the way God interacts with the world. I have studied this over and over again. I can tell you, I only am beginning to get a sense of what's going on here. It's very complicated, but Shekhinah is at the bottom of the Sephirah, and that is the presence of God among us. Is the Shekhinah, and we're going to see that image over and over again. Shechonah in modern Hebrew is a neighborhood. Same root, Mishkan is the temple where God dwells. So it has to do with dwelling presence, that root in Hebrew. Any questions on that? If you have questions, just raise your hands as we go along. Okay, so I want to point out that this actually gets into normative traditional practice. So this is from an Art Scroll prayer book. An Art Scroll prayer book is an Orthodox prayer book, and I've highlighted things I want to call your attention to. So this is an iyun, kind of a spiritual practice that many observe before putting on a talit or putting on tefillin or doing other mitzvot. And so I'm reading here, I know this is small, it says many recite the following declaration of intent before donning the talis. This is the English is Ashkenazi pronunciation. L'shem yichud, for the sake of the unification of the Holy One, blessed is He, and His presence, in fear and love, to unify the name Yud K with Vav K in perfect unity in the name of all Israel. And His presence here is Shechin Te. This is actually, some of this is Aramaic, and it's to unify the name is I can't even read it. Le'ached Shem Yud He B'Vav He. You know that God's actual name is Yud He Vav He. It's sort of interesting here. They write it K because they don't even think they should write in English Yud He and Vav He. They're willing to write it with the Hebrew letters. But the underlying assumption, again, you're going to see this in some of the stories, is God is not unified at the moment. This is kind of interesting. When we recite the Shema, we chant Adonai Echad, right? God is one. But then at the end of the service, we recite a phrase from, I think it's from Zechariah, one of the prophets, B'yom hahu, on that day, Yihya Adonai Echad, God will be one, Ushemo Echad, and God's name will be one. So there's a tension, even in our liturgy, as to whether or not God is truly unified. And one of the things you're going to see here is this idea that with the destruction of the temple in the year 70, God's unity was affected. And you'll see those stories very explicitly. But my point in showing this page from Art Scroll is that this is not a subject which is just a subject of deep esoteric speculation. If you're praying from an Orthodox prayer book, it's highly likely that you will have this phenomenon right in your prayer book. So now I'm going to read just a bunch of myths, and I can see, it's not the easiest thing to see here. Even I'm in trouble reading it because I'm reading from a fairly small screen. The creation of the Shekhinah. God's heavenly treasures were hidden in the innermost of many chambers. They could not be revealed to anyone, for they were too well hidden. So God decided to bring together his heavenly treasures in his daughter, the Shekhinah. That way, he could make them available to the world, but only to those who knew where they could be found. So God saw to it that his daughter, the Shekhinah, contained within herself all the paths of wisdom. Whoever knows those paths has access to God and to all heavenly wisdom. And whoever would like to fathom those paths must turn to her in help, for only she knows where God has hidden his heavenly treasures. So I'm not going to try and read all the fine print here. It's really pretty fine. So this feminine aspect of God, you'll see, is presented as a feminine god, a goddess. It's presented as the bride of God, and it's also presented as the daughter of God. And also, the Sabbath queen is a representation of this idea. I'll read here. The concept that God has masculine and feminine aspects is explicitly stated in the Zohar as the ancient one whose name is blessed. That's a name for God often used in the Zohar. Took on form, he shaped everything in male and female form. In another form, things could not exist. Therefore, from the beginning of development was at once male and female, with Chokhmah as the father and Bina as the mother. That's a thing I mentioned before. And I think in Hebrew, every noun is either masculine or feminine. So in this way of thinking, the fact that everything in the world is either masculine or feminine is because God is both masculine and feminine. So this is another midrash. Let's see, where is this one from? From Philo. Philo was an interesting character, a Greek Jew, had a tremendous influence on Christianity, first century writing in Greek. God's daughter. The Sabbath is God's daughter, begotten by God alone, without begetting. He brought to birth, but not carried in the womb. The Sabbath said before God, Master of the universe, you have given a mate to everyone except me. Each of the days of the week has a mate, but I have none. God replied, the people of Israel are your mate. And when Israel stood before Mount Sinai, Moses saw that the Sabbath was lovely and that she was a virgin. With his keener vision, he saw the marvelous beauty of the Sabbath stamped upon heaven and earth and enshrined in nature herself. Here the commentary is worth reading. Here Philo offers an allegory in which the Sabbath is described as God's daughter. The purpose of the allegory is to indicate the importance of the Sabbath to God and the people Israel who observe the Sabbath. Later rabbinic and Kabbalistic development linked the Sabbath with the figure of the Shabbat queen, one of the personifications of the Shekhinah. Such developments are identified with the Shekhinah as God's bride. Thus, Philo's identification of the Sabbath as God's daughter may be seen to prefigure later mythic developments found in Sefer HaBahir, where the Shekhinah is portrayed as daughter, sister, wife, and mother. as the title of Peter Schleifer's article puts it, and in the Zohar and other Kabbalistic texts. In Philo's version of the myth, God gives the Sabbath to Israel the way a father gives away his daughter at a wedding. The garments of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah has many garments consisting of holy angels from above and Israel from below. From these garments, God created the throne of glory, as well as heaven and earth and all the creatures therein. The robe of the Shekhinah is made of light. The light of the first day is reflected from that robe. The Shekhinah wears that robe whenever Israel gives forth light through good deeds. But when Israel does evil, she is garbed in the black garments of Lilith, and she is forced to wear them until Israel repents. So another text looking down on Lilith. This also is Zohar. So these are some of the more graphic descriptions of God's relationship with the Shekhinah. The sacred bedchamber. On the very day King Solomon completed the building of the temple in Jerusalem, God and his bride were united, and her face shone with perfect joy. There was joy for all above and below. As long as the temple stood, it served as the sacred bedchamber of God the King and his bride, the Shekhinah. Every midnight, she would enter through the palace of the Holy of Holies, and she and God would celebrate their joyous union. The loving embrace of the king and the queen assured the well-being not only of Israel, but of the whole world. The king would come to his queen and lie in her arms, and all that she asked of him, he would fulfill. He placed his left arm under her head, his right arm embraced her, and he let her enjoy his strength. Their pleasure in each other was indescribable. He made his home with her and took his delight between her breasts. They lay in tight embrace, her image impressed on his body like a seal imprinted on a page, as it is written, "Set me as a seal upon your heart," Song of Songs again. As long as the temple stood, the king would come down from his heavenly abode every midnight, seek out his bride, and enjoy her in their sacred bedchamber. But when the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah went into exile, and bride and groom were torn apart. And so here's that story. The lament of the Shekhinah. Since the destruction of the temple, the Shekhinah descends night after night to the place of the temple, enters the Holy of Holies, and sees that her dwelling house and her couch are ruined and soiled. And she wanders up and down, wails and laments, and weeps bitterly. She looks at the place of the cherubs and lifts up her voice and says, my couch, my dwelling place, where my husband would come to me and lie in my arms. And all that I asked of him, he would give me. My couch, do you not remember how I came to you in joy and contentment? And how those youths, the cherubim, came forth to meet me, beating their wings in welcome? How has the ark of the covenant, which stood here, come to be forgotten? From here went forth nourishment to all the world, and light and blessing to all. Now I seek my husband in every place, but he is not here. My husband, where have you gone? Do you not remember how you held your left arm beneath my head, and your right arm embraced me? And you vowed that you would never cease loving me, and now you have forgotten me. Can't remember if there's commentary. I'll read the exile of the Shekhinah. So this is this image of the rabbinic thinking about the temple in Jerusalem. Now, this is from the Zohar, which was probably written, more than 1,000 years after the temple is destroyed. But there's still this image which works very well for me. I think it'd be an interesting discussion. I think a lot of our images about God relate, maybe I'm revealing more about myself than I should, relate to our images of our parents. And I remember, feeling wonderful that my father and mother had such a loving relationship and would go on vacations together and not take us. I think it gave us a great sense of security. And I sense that in these stories, that when the temple stood, God was whole and one, and everything was really okay. And now with the destruction of the temple, there is this image of, and we'll see it in the next story of God sending away God's bride, of almost an abusive relationship. I'm going to see that in the next story. Excuse me. When the temple was still standing, Israel would perform their rites and bring offerings and sacrifices, and the Shekhinah rested upon them in the temple, like a mother hovering over her children. And all faces were resplendent with light, so that there was blessing both above and below. When the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah came and went up to all those places where she used to dwell, and she would weep for her home and for Israel, who had gone into exile, and for all the righteous and pious ones who had perished. By the way, I mean, we sometimes lose sight of this, but the revolt against Rome in the year 70 was what we would call a Shoah or a Holocaust. A third of the Jews were murdered, lost their lives in that revolt. At that time, the Holy One, blessed be He, questioned the Shekhinah and said to her, "What ails you?" And she replied, weeping, "My children are in exile, and the sanctuary has been burnt. So why should I remain here? Now the temple is destroyed, and the Shekhinah is with Israel in exile, and there is no joy to be found above or below." I'll read Schwartz's commentary. The myth about the separation of God and His bride is a primary example of the emergence of the Shekhinah as an independent mythical figure. The story also resembles the conflict between an angry couple, where the wife leaves the husband and accompanies the children, here the children of Israel. From the perspective of the Zohar, the fact that the Shekhinah accompanied Israel is evidence of God's attachment to Israel. All the time Israel was in exile, the Shekhinah was in exile with them. And since the Shekhinah was with them, God remembered them to do good to them and bring them out of exile. One of the images here we see in other midrashes is they compare this. I can't remember if I have this in another story, but they talk about it in a parable, and they say it's like the king who got angry with his son and sent his son into exile. But because he so loved his son or his children, that although the anger and the problem was such that he couldn't allow the child to return to him in the palace, the king went into exile with his children. So that's the image here, although they're splitting the roles between the king and the Shekhinah, between God and the Shekhinah, where God so loves the children of Israel, even though they're in exile. Once the temple is destroyed, the children of Israel are no longer in Jerusalem. They're in exile. God so loves the children of Israel that that God in the form of the Shekhinah accompanies the children. And Sandra, I see your hand is up. You need to unmute.
Well, I was just thinking when you were talking about the king and how he banished his son, it just reminded me of what's going on right now in England with Charles and all that mess over there.
Yeah,
Gossip.
so one of the things which is I find fascinating and a little shocking about these stories is it presents God in very human terms. And so again, that's another consequence of that. If we're created in God's image, what it suggests is that there's human aspects of God. And sometimes I think about it this way. The rationalist Maimonides would say, God has no image. God is purely spirit. When we talk about the face of God or God taking us out of Egypt with a strong arm and so on, Maimonides famously says that the Torah speaks in the language of people. So these are just images that we use. But really, we shouldn't have any image for God. My sense of the Kabbalists go overboard in the opposite direction. Rather than no image of God, they will have hundreds of different images of God, each one of which, can describe a different aspect of God in terms that we can very much relate to. We can understand, a couple that's having problems and children that are, like you say, with England, children that are banished, and what's the relationship there? So here you have, particularly if you look at Spain, here you have a Jewish community living in Spain, which is as far away from the Holy Land as you can get without falling off the end of the earth. This is pre-Columbus now. So that's, and you can imagine that they have this longing to go back to the Holy Land. And so they are describing God in these very anthropomorphic terms. Okay, so this is more commentary on this exile of the Shekhinah. This is the story I was thinking of. The exile of the Shekhinah is presented in the form of a parable about a king in Sefer HaBahir. Sefer HaBahir is written about the same time as the Zohar, about 1,000 years ago, in which the king had a beautiful wife and children, but when the children turned to evil ways, the king became angry with the children and their mother. The mother went to the children and upbraided them for their behavior and its consequences until they changed their ways and did the will of their father. Then the king remembered them and loved them as much as he did in the beginning, and also remembered their mother. The king, of course, is God, and the king's wife is Shekhinah, while the children of Israel. According to Rabbi Shlomo Rabinowitz of Radonsk, the Shekhinah protects Jews like the mother taking care of her children. The myth of the exile of the Shekhinah found in the Zohar follows this earlier parable closely, and the earlier parable may well be the inspiration for it. It's interesting to note in the parable from Sefer HaBahir, the queen is responsible for the well-being of her children, and the fate of the queen depends upon the fate of her children. When the children repent and God loves them once again, he also remembers his love for their mother, the queen. This hints at an aspect of Kabbalah, I was just talking about this today, which I find revolutionary and wonderful. And that aspect is, if the goal of Judaism ultimately is the perfection of the world and redemption, Kabbalah teaches that God cannot do this alone. God actually needs us. And we talk about in modern terms, tikkun olam. And Rabbi, you just took the teens to Washington to work on these things. But I love this idea in Judaism that God cannot accomplish these things without human involvement, that we are truly partners in the covenant. And this story reflects that. The suffering of the Shekhinah. Wherever Israel is exiled and the Shekhinah is exiled with them and suffers with them. Those who are in this bitter exile should not be concerned with their personal distress, but should only lament the exile of the Shekhinah. For through Torah study and prayer, one is able to repair the limbs of the Shekhinah that were shattered in exile. There's also, I'll get to this in a second. How many of you know the myth? I actually wrote a song about this. I don't think I will do it tonight. About it being a special double mitzvah to make love on Friday night. How many of you have heard that one? So that actually there's a Kabbalistic source to this, because if we humans are the shadow of God, and in Genesis, the text is that we're created b'tselem Elohim, and one of the meanings of tselem is image, but it also is a shadow. So if we are the shadow of God, I have some slides on this when I teach Kabbalah. If you're looking at a shadow doing something, you can be pretty darn sure that the thing making the shadow is also doing that, right? I don't have good lighting here to reflect that. So one of the things that's going on here is this sense that, and again, forgive me, this is very normative heterosexual, but if male and female unite in union and love on Erev Shabbat, on the beginning of Shabbat, we are in a sense contributing to the unity of God and his Shekhinah in the heavens. And that's one of the reasons this idea comes into Judaism. The face of the Shekhinah. In the days of Moses, even the ordinary Israelite had the privilege of being spoken to by the Shekhinah, face to face. In later times, not even Ezekiel was accorded this privilege. It is said that whoever leaves the synagogue and enters the house of study to engage in the study of Torah will have the merit of seeing the face of the Shekhinah. So too, when scholars discuss the Torah, they often behold the face of the Shekhinah and are surrounded with fire. Such was the case when Rabbi Chia came to visit Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. As he passed the window, he saw a fiery curtain inside the house, with the Shekhinah on one side of the curtain and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on the other. They were studying Torah in that way, and Rabbi Shimon's countenance was aflame with the intoxication of the Torah. Rabbi Chia was so electrified by the sight he could not even knock on the door. All at once the door opened and Rabbi Chia looked inside, and as he did, he glimpsed the face of the Shekhinah, and he lowered his eyes and stood frozen in place. When Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saw that Rabbi Chia had been struck dumb, he said to his son, Rabbi Elazar, "Go to Rabbi Chia and pass your hand over his mouth." Elazar did this, and at last Rabbi Chia recovered his senses. Some say that to see the righteous and saintly sages of one's generation is to see the very face of the Shekhinah. Why are these called the face of Shekhinah? Because the Shekhinah is hidden in them, and they reveal her. This much is certain. Before they died and gained entrance into the celestial palace, all the saints who had descended from Adam came face to face with the Shekhinah. Of them it is said, a cord of divine will has been grasped here on earth. So this looks like it's Talmud, Zohar, and Midrash. The term saints you may find a little jarring. Saints sound Christian to our ears, but I think that this is simply a translation. I don't have the original text of the word tzaddikim. Sonia would say that in Morocco they would go visit the saints on the yahrzeit of their passing, and what she meant by that is there were great rabbis of Morocco, and they would go visit their graves. Once a year, each tzaddik would have a yahrzeit, and there was a sense that that the saint had a special connection to God. So this idea is also reflected in the mission of the Pirkei Avot, which we study, and I'll just highlight this a little bit. This is in the third chapter of Avot. These two rabbis said that when 10 sit together and occupy themselves with Torah, the Shekhinah abides among them. Shekhinah sheruya b'neihem. As it is said, God stands in the congregation of God. So now they say 10. Well, how do we know this is true of 5? So we'll have a proof text for 5. How do we know the same is true for 3? We have a proof text for 3. How do we know it's true of 2? They have a proof text of that. And how do we know that this is true even of 1? As it is said, "And every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you," from Exodus. So basically, if you want to see the face of God, study Torah with people who love to study Torah, and you get a glimpse. And just as I was reading the other story, we have this sort of conflict in Torah, whether you can see God and live. So I think one of the things that's going on here is in the Zohar, in Kabbalistic text, God is tenfold. And at the element of God that dwells among us is the Shekhinah. We even call the temple the Mishkan. The portable temple in the desert was the Mishkan, the dwelling place of God. So we can see the face of the Shekhinah, and we can get some sense of some of the other Sefirot, but certainly the Shekhinah. And the key is studying sacred text. I think we're getting toward the end here. Yeah, we're getting toward the end of the hour. The Shekhinah at the wall. So this is a commentary on the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. The Shekhinah is said to hover over the Wailing Wall, and she doesn't move from there. The northern corner of the wall is where the Shekhinah reveals herself. Whoever desires to see the face of the Shekhinah must devote his life to the study of Torah. Very few have been worthy to see the Shekhinah hovering over the wall. The presence of the Shekhinah is strongly linked to the Western Wall, the retaining wall that is all that is said to remain of the temple in Jerusalem. There are many accounts in rabbinic texts and Jewish folklore about visions or encounters with the Shekhinah at the wall, but only those who have truly studied Torah are considered worthy of seeing the Shekhinah. And there's other stories there. So I think I have some images. So here's an older image of the Western Wall when men and women would pray there together. Although it looks like we're only seeing women here, I'm pretty sure men and women prayed together before recent times. Modern image of the notes put in the wall, and here of the, the broad area of the Western Wall. And this is the Western Wall. So this end toward the right is the southern area, and the northern area that they were speaking of is in this direction, and it's pretty much underground. The Western Wall tunnels go along the Western Wall to the north, and you can actually emerge there. This is one I like. From the Zohar, the wedding. So if the Shekhinah is the bride of God, there had to be a wedding, right? Right. When they are first engaged, God sends his betrothed nuptial presents and a meal of celestial bread. So does he make preparations for the wedding feast. On the eve of Shavuot, this is the night before Shavuot, before the wedding takes place, the members of the heavenly household remain with the bride all night and rejoice in the preparations for the wedding. They study Torah, progressing from the 5 books of Moses to the prophets, and from the prophets to the writings, and then to the midrashic and mystical interpretation of the text. For these are the adornments of the and finery of the bride. And you may know, on the night before Shavuot, there is a Kabbalistic custom, I'm sure it comes out of this concept, of staying up all night to study sacred text. Throughout the night, the bride rejoices with her maidens and is made ready by them. And in the morning, she enters the bridal canopy, illumined with the radiance of sapphire, which shines from one end of the world to the other. Shining in all her finery, she awaits each of those who help prepare her. And at the moment when the sun enters the bridal canopy and illumines her, all the companions are identified by name. And God inquires after them and blesses them, and crowns them with bridal crowns, and blessed is their portion. Then the bridegroom enters the chuppah, the bridal canopy, and he offers 7 nuptial blessings and unites with his bride, joining with the queen in perfect union, and the heavens declare the glory of God. In a Jewish wedding, there are 7 blessings that we recite. So I think I have some pictures here. Yeah, this is a picture I took. When I was at HUC, the year I spent at HUC, I was there just before Shavuot, and we had a study session, as you can imagine, an all-night study session. But the fantastic thing about that one is we started late in the evening, and we had kind of a group service together. And then we went out into Jerusalem in different groups, small groups, with scholars from Hebrew Union College, and we talked about sections of the Bible in the neighborhood where they occurred, which was really, just an amazing experience. And then at dawn, we went to the Kotel to celebrate the dawn, and then back to HUC for a Shavuot morning service. A few years later, I led a tour to Israel, and we were there on Shavuot. And of course, I knew that HUC was having a program to study all night, or at least late into the evening on Shavuot. And I have to admit, I was shocked and surprised, though I said, let's meet in the lobby of the hotel at, 10 or 10:30 that night. Nobody wanted to come with me, go figure. But this is a picture I took, actually, as I was leaving the Kotel, as the sun is coming up, and it doesn't capture it so well, but the entire plaza is just stuffed with people. And on the men's side, all the men are wearing white talesim. And there's just a sea of white, and it looks like a big wedding to me. I'll tell you one other funny Shavuot wedding story. I was approached by a couple who was getting married in Mexico, actually in Cabo. And they both Jewish, no issues, and they investigated having the local rabbi marry them. Local rabbi is Orthodox. And they were very puzzled because when they approached the rabbi, he kicked them out of his office without explaining why. And they knew me from other other arrangements, and I actually went down and did the wedding, but they didn't know why he kicked them out. And the answer was they were getting married on Shavuot. And the rabbi was so offended by this, he didn't even bother explaining it. And of course, my reaction to this, based on these stories, is I think Shavuot is a perfect day to hold a wedding. This, of course, would not be endorsed in traditional Judaism. You don't have weddings on Jewish holidays. But I think it's a great idea. There's discussion, of the chuppah is the sky, and the ketubah, the wedding contract, is the Torah, and God and Shekhinah are being married. It's a perfect day for a wedding, in my opinion. So we have these images. Okay, so this is a nice image because of the issue of ownership. I actually contacted the artist here and got her permission to use this image for the Sabbath bride. I hope everyone enjoyed celebrating Purim, because I'm going to show you an image that you may be surprised at. Oh, no, okay, we'll get there. So first we're going to read about Sabbath bride. Every seventh day, Sabbath bride, every seventh day her coronation takes place. Before the start of the ceremony, the dwelling place is prepared, like the chamber of a bridegroom set to receive his bride. Meanwhile, the bride herself remains alone, separated from the forces of evil. There she adorns herself with a crown for the holy king and prepares herself for the union. Then, as the Sabbath begins, the radiant bride is escorted by angels on high and Israel below, and she is ushered into Israel's abode to be in their midst. There she is crowned by the prayers of the holy people. Excuse me. And they in turn are adorned with new souls, so that they are all united above and below. I'm not going to read through the whole commentary, but this image is certainly what we image in the song Lecha Dodi, come my bride. And the imagery of the mystics in Sfat was that the Jews await the Sabbath bride with the same fervor as a bridegroom awaits his bride on their wedding night. So you have this wedding image. So just a couple of other images to send you off with something to think about. Here's an article. Yes, there is a reason Chamantashen look like vaginas.
Okay.
You will never look at a Chamantashen again the same way. And you can Google this. There's a couple of articles, but basically it has to do with the heavenly queen, and you find references to this in the Bible. And it doesn't look like Haman's ears. Sorry. It doesn't look like Haman's pockets. Sorry. Call me a dirty old man. But at least this author, and there's a couple of articles on this. I don't think there is scholarly consensus on this issue, but it'll give you something to look forward to for next Purim. Okay, and next week we will be talking, we'll go from Shekhinah and the heavenly bride to myths of hell and the angel of death. And yes, Jews have a concept of hell in the afterlife. So that's the material I wanted to cover. Discussion, questions?
Yes, if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free. Seeing none, I will thank Rabbi Lotker.
Okay.
Thank you.
For a very intriguing and what's the word? Provocative?
Yes.
Thought-provoking? Yes.
Yes. I mean, I'm curious to know what you think about this. Are you horrified? Are you delighted?
Well, maybe you could can you clarify something?
Sure.
So if the Hamantashen is supposed to be a vagina and somehow it's connected to Shekhinah, so can you tell us how that connection was made?
There is a discussion. In the material I looked at, there wasn't a connection with the Shekhinah, but there was a connection of, I'd have to look at the articles.
Okay, you can tell us next time.
Yeah, there is one of the prophets write about the goddess and people worshiping the goddess, and of course there is in the Bible. There are little gods, and Rachel has her household gods and so on. So there is this theory and I think it's really just the theory, that this may be a vestige of the concept of a heavenly goddess. And I don't know that it's considered to be the Shekhinah's vagina, but if one can utter such a word. Tune in next week for another shocking conclusion to the study
Okay,
session.
Sandy,
but
go
I
ahead.
have a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Thank you.
It
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
struck me, we talk about the Christians have Jesus, right?
Yes, they do.
And even though we have Moses, he's not the same for us as Jesus is to Christians. And now all of a sudden you're coming up with God's daughter.
And wife. Yeah,
Yeah,
so to put a finer note on it, Christians have Jesus and understanding a triune version of God, a Trinity, threefold. In a very real sense, the Sephirot suggests that God is tenfold, not just threefold. And I would say the rabbis were very nervous about Moses being worshipped, which is why Moses is not mentioned in the Haggadah. Talk about shocking and surprising things. Imagine having an entire long holiday celebration of the Exodus without mentioning Moses at all. And the reason, I think scholars believe that this is the way the Haggadah was put together. Now, I know in your modern Haggadot, you can do whatever you want. There's a lot of flexibility. But the traditional Haggadah text, I'm actually going to be starting to teach this in a few weeks on Monday nights. We're going to take, well, actually, I'm in the midst of doing a careful study of the Haggadah and text. But the scholarly consensus is they were afraid that people would worship Moses in the same way that Christians were worshiping Jesus. And so therefore, it is pretty, they go out of their way not to make Moses the Redeemer. You know, Jesus, Yeshua, the Redeemer, Salvador, the salvation. The rabbis go out of their way to avoid that idea. And there's a phrase in the Haggadah where it says, you know, I will redeem you, I myself, not by an angel and not by a seraph and not by this and not by that. And the scholars believe that's a very subtle reference to the idea that it's God who is the Redeemer, not, you know, a child of God in any sense. But yeah, absolutely, that it's yeah, now we have a bride of God, we have a daughter of God, and even more intimate parts of God.
Well, thank you so much for a lively class, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday, same time,
Okay,
same place.
okay. And next
So-
Thursday, bring your own handbasket because we're going to hell.
Okay.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much, Rabbi.
Okay.
Good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
I know.
Good night.
Okay. Take care. And I'm not rushing off in case.